One.
Data models. What are data models? Data models are structures created to manage data and make it useful to people and computers alike. And so a simple data model is the top row of a spreadsheet. And so what that top row is doing is it's basically answering the question, like, what are we describing? How are we describing it? If it were a shopping list, what we might be describing is an item and a quantity. And so, that's a very simple data model. That's just with two kind of facets of information. Another thing data models answer are, what terms do you use to classify a thing? So with a shopping list, one of the terms, terms that you could use to classify it might be where you want to do the shopping of that item, right? So it might be you want to get spaghetti, 3 packs of spaghetti at the grocery store, but you also need a hammer at the hardware store. And so that would be reflected in your data model. And the classification there would be kind of the type of store that you would need to go to get that item. And also, moving beyond spreadsheets and into databases, we also have data models can also tell us how one thing relates to another thing. And so going back to the shopping list example, if we were going to the grocery store to get the spaghetti, we also might have another table of data of grocery stores with their locations and their hours. And then we could connect the shopping list to the specific store in a different table, which has its own kind of sub-data model, and those data models can connect. And that's what databases allow us to do. And so data models, they emerge organically all the time. And they're kind of like, I like this picture because it's like a walking path. The more people walk along, the more you kind of organize information, the more the path is defined just by your activity. And so watching how people are already organizing information, yourself or others around you, and using that to model your data and to formalize that data, to formalize that method, enables you to create these structures that can get more and more useful. And so elements of a data model, and this is just some elements of a data model, are like the schema, the taxonomies, the formats, the licenses, and the governance. And the terms that I use aren't exactly the same as the terms other people use for these things, but once we start going through it, I think you'll see what we're talking about here. So schema, so data model schema is basically the key in the key value pair. And you can see, right, this is like the top row of the spreadsheet is the key. And the values are what come below that. And it also denotes how a column relates to a table. And so, and this is in an Airtable example where these columns can actually connect to other tables of data. As you can see in this example, in the second column with organization, there's also an organization table behind it that it's referencing information from. Okay, and so then once you get into the categorical type, we also have taxonomies, right? And these are sets of terms used to classify items. So in spreadsheets, people use, you can use data validation to kind of create a fixed set of terms that you can apply in a column. But in Airtable, it's a lot simpler. You can use a multi-select or a single select data type. You can create the list of available types, and then that's what the format makes, the interface makes accessible. And then we talked about data formats before. We're going to keep talking about them. The most popular data format for the tabular data, the data that we're going to be using, is CSVs, and that's this comma separated value format. So all spreadsheets, as well as Airtable, can import and export CSVs, and that's why it's so useful. And here you can see where in Airtable you can download a CSV, and you can also import a spreadsheet, which is importing a CSV. And another element of data models is the license applied to the data contained therein. So defining what people are allowed to do with your data can be considered an element of a data model. And so if you don't pick a license, you create ambiguity, and that ambiguity can be used, basically should be discouraged. I mean, it can be, if you're not worried about how people are using your data, you can kind of not worry about this. But if you're creating like data sets that are going to be shared publicly, then you're going to want to think a little bit about a data license. And open data licenses exist, which allow you to enable anyone to use that data in a relatively responsible manner. And finally, and this is where data models turn into data standards, is the governance piece. So if you're creating a data model for your organization, like what we did, what we do often for organizations, it's good to think also about governance. Who's deciding what's in that data model, and then how are you going to update that data model over time so that new information, new needs can be met by the data. And next up, we go into data standards, where we talk much more about all that stuff.